Welcome to another edition of the Working Parents Network here at the University of Kentucky monthly workshop. Today we're going to be talking about advocating for your child in education. And we have some speakers with us from the Fayette County Public School system who's going to be sharing tips and suggestions for parents, not only in the Fayette County school system, but any parent anywhere will find these tips helpful and useful.
Okay, Ms. V, I think you're up.
All right, so advocating for your child. I am V. Pryor and I work in the Office of Innovation. You can go to the next slide, to the first slide that says Magnet and Specialized Programs. And so as the Office of Innovation, one of the things that I do as a program manager is I coordinate and work along with all the district-wide magnet and specialized academic programs. And so I am the point person for all things related to district-wide magnet and the specialized academic program area. Go to the next slide, please. So, really our motto for Fayette County Public Schools is every child who enters the public school system is really unique. And for us, it is our responsibility to provide every one of our students with the different experiences, the different opportunities, pathways that they need in order to succeed. And so we have a wide variety of magnet and specialized academic programs that really try to reach every student, the unique strengths and talents of every one of our students. Next slide. So a lot of times families want to know, well, what's the difference between magnet programs and specialized academic programs? And really a magnet program is just really about, it's a theme of a specific area of interest for a student. It really fosters high achievement, encourage creativity, and really it is an opportunity for students to go outside of their area school. We know that, every school does not meet every need. And so our magnet programs really opens up the opportunities for our students and open up pathways for our students to study in specialty areas. Next slide. Our specialized programs are typically focused on a specific area. So you're talking about pre-engineering, technology, different areas of focus. And usually a lot of our specialized programs are a school within a school. So for example, the Leestown pre-engineering program is in Leestown Middle School. And so they have that pathway that is made available district-wide for students that are interested in the pre-engineering program or the MSTC program at Paul Lawrence Dunbar. It's really typically a program within a school. Next slide. So our district-wide programs are really, they're district-wide. So any person, regardless of what area they're in within Fayette County, has an opportunity to apply to any one of those programs. And there are different modes of the application process. Some of our programs are lottery-based. Some are lottery and criteria-based. Others are open enrollment, and while others are criteria-based only. Students are either placed in those programs, waitlisted, or considered not eligible, and that is all a part of our offer season process. And there's a lot of communication, a lot of information that goes out to our families during that time. But district-wide programs are district-wide. So any one of our students, any student can apply to multiple programs. Next slide. So we have right now 4 elementary programs. It's our Dixie Magnet, the Rise STEM Academy for girls, the George Washington Carver STEM School for boys, and the Maxwell Spanish Immersion Program. And all of these programs are lottery-based, which means that for the most part, there are no criteria other than applying on time and submitting your application. we run a lottery and we notify our families in March. And so for our elementary programs, you will find that it's seat-based, so it depends on how many seats we have available, will determine how many students we can accept for that year. But it is a random lottery. The only criteria, which is really not a criteria, but we do weight the lottery, and the only weight that we currently have is sibling. A sibling, it is not guaranteed, but if a student is already in the program and their sibling applies, we do place a weight on that student for sibling preference. Next slide. Our middle school programs are Leestown Pre-Engineering, the Lexington Traditional Magnet, the Bryan Station Spanish Immersion Program, and the Carter G. Woodson Academy. And so you can see that each program has a different selection process. Leestown Pre-Engineering is more criteria-based. Lexington Traditional Magnet is lottery. Bryan Station Immersion is lottery. And so is Carter G. Woodson. Now, with our Bryan Station Immersion program, you may have to test, you may have to test into the program. If you are not already a part of the immersion strand, they, will test you to ensure that you can be successful in that program, but they are lottery based. And typically, a lot of our programs, especially when you start going to middle and those high school programs, a lot of times, they have very heavy wait list. And so that's why we share with our families, make sure that you apply on time, because late applications oftentimes have a very slim chance of getting into those programs. Next slide. And then we have our high school programs. We have a wonderful high school programs, our International Baccalaureate program, which is really an open enrollment program. And I love that because there's no criteria for that program. It is very rigorous, but it is a very strong program, and we receive a lot of applications for that program. The Frederick Douglass Biomedical Program, which is criteria and lottery based. Our pre-engineering program, STEAM Academy, the Spanish Immersion Program for high school, our Bryan Station Arts program, and our Carter G. Woodson Academy. And as you can see, they all, again, have different selection criteria process. Some are open enrollment, others are lottery, some are lottery and criteria based. And so if you go to our website, which the information will be at the end, you will, see a lot more information about the different programs. I will tell you that if you have questions about any particular program, the first thing that I will tell you to do is go to the website. If there are questions that are not being answered for you on the website, there is contact information on our website. We have a booklet online that will also share with you the contacts for those programs, and they're always willing to answer any questions that you have about the program. They are always available, and they make themselves available to respond via email, which I would always say do that first, is to send an email to the contact, and they are really good about getting back with you. Next. And so we have our gifted programs, SCAPA. We have SCAPA Bluegrass, SCAPA Lafayette, the Gifted and Talented Accelerated Program, which is grades 4 through 8. Our Liberal Arts Academy at Henry Clay, and our Math, Science, and Technology Center. And as you can see, the gifted programs, you're going to see there's either an audition or there's testing, benchmarking to be eligible for those programs. And so those gifted areas. Now for the SCAPA and the SCAPA program, it is audition based only. So you apply, you go through the audition process, and then you are notified whether or not your student met the criteria to get into that program. And then so the gifted and the liberal arts and the math and science is testing and academic benchmarks. Again, there is a gifted coordinator. If you have questions about the gifted programs, SCAPA and SCAPA Lafayette has a coordinator, and the gifted and talented has coordinators as well. And so you can reach out directly to those folks, and they'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about the details of that. And I will tell you that that SCAPA has a lot of information on their website about their audition process, as well as the GTAP program and the liberal arts and math and science. They have it really laid out very clearly on their website about the expectations for auditions and testing. And so I would direct you to go there first. All right, next slide. Okay, all right, technical programs, next slide. Talk to you a little bit about our technical programs. I see there's a question, but I'm thinking that the questions will be toward the end, and then we'll answer those questions at that time. So we have the South Side, and at the South Side, we have the industrial technology, carpentry, East Side, the locust trades. You see that there is different areas for the different technical schools, whether it's electronics, video production, equine, food science. There is just a wide range of opportunities for our students. Okay, all right, next. Our specialty programs, you have the GROTC, the Success Academy, and the Success Academy has two strands. The Success Academy has the re-engagement, and so that's students that may be, they may need credit recovery. But then they also have the virtual learning center, which are for students that want to learn virtually. It's like a virtual school. It is not a alternative program. It is a virtual school. It's a school without walls. So they have those two strands there. You have the Learning Center, the Stables, Martin Luther King Jr., the Opportunity Middle College, and again, the ROTC. And the Learning Center, the Stables, is really for kids that may want to learn in a smaller learning environment. It's heavily project-based. And so those programs are more geared towards those students. Next slide. I want to give some important dates. We have every year our annual Innovative Program Showcase. All the programs that I just mentioned will be there. They are represented there. They showcase, they have students there, they have families there. And we have a really good time at the showcase. Families have a great opportunity to learn more. They get to meet the coordinators, they get to meet the teachers, and they get to get questions, very important questions, specific questions answered. That's going to take place Saturday, January 6th. From 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Takes Creek High School. The application window goes from January 6th to the 22nd, and the offer notifications are from March 5th through the 7th. Next slide. And then finally, as a resource, you can go right to this webpage, www.fcps.net/application. And it will house all of the information about the application process. It has the information for all of the different programs, the specialty programs, and you can quickly link up to those sites. And of course, it has information about the showcase as well. Next slide. And then finally, here's our contact information. You have any questions? Dr. Ron Chi is the Chief Officer of Innovation, and then you have my information there as well. If you have any questions at all about any of our programs, feel free to give me a call. Thank you for this opportunity to share, and that ends my presentation.
Thanks, Bea. So Ben Martin and I will be up next. You did have one question in the chat. I answered it for you. You can review that and be sure I answered it appropriately, but I think I did, having had a student in that program. So now Mr. Martin and I are going to discuss Section 504 for students in Fayette County. And then a lot of what we're sharing is federal law based, so it would be appropriate for any county. So we are the district co-coordinators for Section 504, and the first slide is mine. So this is our by the number slide. So right now we have just under 3,000 504 plans in all of Fayette County Public Schools. So 158 we have 158 different primary diagnoses for those students that we are servicing. over half of our students on 504 plans are diagnosed with ADHD and may have one or more different diagnoses that go along with that. More than half of the students who are on 504 plans do have a secondary diagnosis. Right now, we have 60% are males who have 504s and 40% are females.
Okay, I think this next slide is me. So this is the law that we use for the whole 504 eligibility determination process. So our main goal with when we determine the student's eligible, we'll go through that process. We'll talk about that here shortly. Is we keep accommodations related to the disability that we have, keep accommodations reasonable to ensure that students have that equitable access to the curriculum in their given schools. I think that's all I have about that slide.
So this next slide is really what 504 is all about. So we can look at students equally, give them all the exact same thing, and that's the first part of this slide, but that may not suffice for some students, like our little guy in the wheelchair cannot see the ball game through the fence. Or we can look at things through an equitable lens, which is where all students receive the accommodations that they need to have access to the curriculum or in this case, access to that ball game. So that's where 504 kind of falls in place. The majority of the students that we service are in the general education environment all day long. So we do have the one federal law, that was the whole extent of the law that Ben presented in the previous slide. It has not been updated in 40 years, but they are working on that.
So the next slide is some criteria that we consider as a 504 committee. Is there a physical or mental impairment? Is there a substantial limitation to a major life activity? Also, is there a record of such impairment, or is the student regarded as having such an impairment, again, that substantially limits a major life activity? There's no diagnoses that automatically qualifies an individual for a 504 plan. But we look at this criteria, and as a 504 committee, a group of individuals knowledgeable of the student, typically teachers, parents, and other school staff that are knowledgeable of the student would be on that 504 committee to determine and make decisions. So again, there's no automatic qualifying diagnosis.
Okay. So impairment, it can be any physical or mental impairment. That can be any physiological disorder or condition or any mental or psychological disorder. So we do have to have some type of record, and typically we start with that diagnosis code that the physician has given to the student, or there might be other outlying evaluators who can also diagnose different conditions, and we can take that information as well. An impairment alone is insufficient to qualify a student. It is one piece of evidence, and the committee must look at multiple sources of evidence, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. We do have to prove that there is an impact on one or more major life activities. Again, this is not an all exhaustive list. This is a list of some of the major life activities that we're looking at for students. So for many students, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is impacting the major life activity of concentrating to a substantial degree. Anxiety might be impacting a student in the major life activity of thinking to a substantial degree if anxious thoughts are overriding their thinking. For a student with type 1 diabetes, it can impact major bodily functions. So what we're looking for is what is the impact from impairment and onto the major life activity. And so we have to prove that there's one or more that the student is impacted more so than their peers.
Okay, so substantial limitation that the 504 committee looks at compared to the average person, a student unable to perform a major life activity as that other peer that can perform that, significantly restricted to the condition. So we look at those. We look at the disability. Is there a substantial limitation? And we decide that as a 504 committee. With a variety of sources, and we will go over on the next slide. We'll talk about the what we need in order to begin this process. So the 4 forms that we need are the referral form that's typically filled out by the by a parent. Anybody can fill that out. Anybody can make a referral. We have to have parental consent to evaluate. As a 504 committee, we would look at the diagnoses, not necessarily go through an evaluation with as a student would if they're in the special education process, referral process, but it's permission for the parents, for the school to go over the variety of sources that we have. At every meeting, parents are provided with the procedural safeguards. We have to have a signed copy of that. And then the physician's questionnaire, the medical mental health physician's questionnaire with the diagnostic information. Those 4 forms are what we need to begin the process. And any other sources of evidence, as you'll see, teacher input, behavior reports, evaluations. If a student has a full psychological evaluation, that could take place of the physician's questionnaire, attendance records, other standardized assessments, physician's orders, and progress reports and grades are all, they all could be considered in the 504 consideration process.
Yes, most of our evaluations are called with a review of existing data. So where we are taking current data from the school and having the committee review all that information. But in order to discuss that, we have to have the consent from the parents. So after we find a student eligible, many times we will write and develop a 504 plan. Not always. Some students are considered technically eligible where they have the overall protections against bullying and discrimination that are provided to them under Section 504. But for the majority of our students, at least in Fayette County, they do have 504 plans with certain specific accommodations that they are given in order to make things equitable for them in the classroom. So those accommodations should be provided in order to meet the needs created by the identification of the disability. So they all have to be related to the identified disability. We are finding that across the nation, one of the big discussions is over accommodating, and under accommodating can be just as detrimental. So it really is to the student. So it really is up to that committee to find the sweet spot and to work on exactly what that specific individual student needs in order to have access in the classroom. Accommodations are provided in an attempt to level that playing field, but not to give an advantage. And accommodations should be relevant to the area of disability at all times. Students should promptly begin receiving the appropriate accommodations once the plan is developed. The only time that may not occur is, let's say we are writing a plan in April and standardized testing is around the corner and the student has not had access to that accommodation all year long. We may not be able to provide that at that time, but they would have access to it the following year. These students' accommodations should be specific to their disability, and all accommodations must relate directly to their disability. Accommodations should not be selected as convenience for the school or as a request of the parent, that it's a committee decision. So the committee includes both school staff and parents so that we can come to consensus as far as what that individual student needs. And all accommodations must be reasonable. We must be able to provide those consistently. So this is just kind of our ending slide for Section 504. If you look at the blue, it's all of the students within a district. The yellow is all the students who may have an impairment, but maybe it's not impacting them to the level of the students who need a Section 504 plan. So the orange are the students who have that impairment and it's substantially limiting one or more major life activities. And then our next group is going to talk to you a little bit about IDEA and the students who are identified as having severe impairment. So Ben and I will be here if you have any questions at the end. I'll check the chat and try to answer questions in writing if we can. But I'm going to turn this over to special education.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandy Chambers Collins, and I'm the Associate Director, excuse me, for Special Ed for high schools, and my partner.
Lashina Deadweiler Hudson. I am the district-wide special education family liaison.
Next slide. Okay, so we're just going to give you general 101 on what special ed is. And Margaret spoke about that. She talked about IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so you're going to learn a little bit about that. So we're just going to talk about developmental continuum milestones, instructions in MTSS process, the child find process, the rights of parents, the evaluation and eligibility process, an individual education plan, and of course, parent resources at the end. Next. All right, so normally we look at starting at birth, what are those developmental milestones? So children and youth, they kind of develop at different times. And so there's a continuum. So when parents start taking their children to the pediatrician, they'll ask them specific questions and there are checklists. And so there are resources that parents can find in the App Store. So the CDC does have, and I put a link there, but the CDC does have a link where you can go in, download the app, and you can look and see how your child is progressing developmentally. Are they walking? Are they talking? Things like that. And if they're not, what happens after that? Next slide. So a lot of times parents will have some concerns. The developmental delays are beyond what is expected for the typical young students. So their growth and development is not always typical or uniform with other students. And so these delays may require some intervention. Typically, when we're looking at students or children at the birth to maybe years 2, if there is a disability, we'll get in contact with what we call early steps. But then once they're about 3 to 4 years old, we're to the preschool age, that's kind of when we will then make a referral to the preschool center. Next slide. So my child is struggling, how? What do we do? So at the preschool level, at least for Fayette County, you would call the preschool center, and that's the number on the screen. And then typically what will happen is the preschool team will contact you for next steps. So they'll just gather some information, and so that when you come in, they'll begin that process. So now when we're looking at K through 12, which is like the kindergarten steps, you would request, if you're in school, you request a meeting with the building MTSS leader. So what MTSS is the multi-tier systems of support. In education, we use a lot of acronyms. So that is a multi-tier system. And when we go through the slides a little bit further on down, we will talk about what that looks like and what that actually is. But it's a plan. A plan is developed to address the concerns, and then you usually have a follow-up meeting. And then if your child is not responding to the interventions, because they would put interventions in place, then at the different levels, then a referral is made, whether to the special education evaluation team. So a teacher can make a referral, a parent can make a referral, providers can make a referral. A referral can come from anyone. It's just that someone who thinks that this child is not responding to the educational interventions, we need to go to the next level. Next slide. If you're not satisfied, of course, with this process, you can ask the MTSS, the multi-tiered system supports team at the building, for a parent referral. So what it would be is that there will be a form that will be filled out. You'll have to ask some specific questions, and then the parents can make the referral, but the interventions will still need to be implemented. When we talk about interventions, we're looking at what does the child need. So if the child is struggling in reading, you know, what things can we put in place to work on those reading skills? If it's a behavior, because sometimes children have behavioral difficulties, what skills or strategies can we put in place to teach those child those appropriate behavioral skills with proper reinforcements, and we're monitoring that process. And then, of course, if you're going through that process and if a parent makes a request and there's no action that's been taken, then of course you can contact our department on the screen at the number below. So the MTSS process, MTSS is a multi-tiered system of support. It's a process that provides high-quality research-based instruction targeted at each learner's level. So what that means is it's research-based, meaning it's not something that someone just throws together. It's built upon specific strategies that have been tried and true over the years. Researchers, educators, top-notch educators put these things together, and it's proven to work, and we do it systematically. So there could be reading interventions, math interventions, behavior interventions, social skills interventions to teach students appropriate behaviors. But it must meet the learner's needs. So for preschool, during this, there is usually prior to the referral, there is a screening process. So we do have to screen the students for hearing impairments and or vision impairments, because we want to make sure, first and foremost, that if there is such an impairment, that we rule that out before we go into a deeper dive into an evaluation. So families are provided with an individualized response to intervention packet. So that package is taken home, and parents will be given strategies that they can use at home and to be able to document how their children are processing and working with those strategies. This is an example of what an MTSS is. Normally, when we look at the green, we're looking at tier 1. When we talk about tier 1, we talk about universal strategies. This is what every child should be getting, whether at school or at home. Everything is the same. Whether it's the core reading program, the core math program, core social studies, everyone will get the same thing. When we go to tier 2, now we're looking a little bit more targeted small group instruction. So sometimes students are not working or responding well with the core, with the general education curriculum. So we need to pull small groups together and put things into place that's targeted to their needs. And then we get to the top of the triangle. We know that the students are still not responding, so we now need to do probably 2-on-1 or 1-on-1 core instruction, but you're not doing the exact same thing. You got to do something different and collect the data so that it works for that child. So it's a problem-solving aspect. When we talk about the MTSS process in the instructional, there's 3 tiers, 1, 2, and 3, which I just discussed. Universal screening and database decision-making is what we look at. So we look at what data do we have, what have we collected, how are the students responding, based on the information that we're seeing as we're graphing this information and sharing this information with the parents and adults with the team, then we can put some supports in place, both academic and behavioral, to see how the student is continuing to respond. And then this is kind of an idea of what tier 1 is. So if we look at its differentiated instruction, tier 1, we're looking at something that guides all teachers, what students should be getting in the classroom. So they're all getting the same core curriculum, core instruction, they're responding. We're looking at the test scores. We're given research-based instructional strategies. When we get to tier 2 again, that targeted support. Johnny, Sally, Sue, that it's not working. Let's do something different, but in a smaller setting, and we'll work with their skills. And then when we get to tier 1, it's more how much time, what is the intent of that instruction, how much do we need to sustain to make sure this child is learning. And typically, if we get to tier 3 and the child is still not responding or making very limited progress, that's usually an indication that the child may need specialized instructional approaches. So they may more than likely, after we do all the interventions and evaluations, this child then may qualify for special education under IDA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then, of course, what we talk about is child fines. So this is the regulation under federal law, but then under federal law, each state is required to interpret what those laws look like and how they're going to implement those in the school district. So Child Find Regulation A, prior to or part of the referral process, the child is provided appropriate, relevant, research-based instruction and intervention services in a regular education setting with instruction provided by qualified personnel. So what that really means is, once again, they're in the regular class. A student starts off in general education first and foremost. They were always a general education student first. And then once we provide that qualified instructional personnel with research-based strategies, if it's not working, then we'll go to the next level. Next slide. B, database documentation of repeated assessments of achievement of measures, reasonable interventions reflecting systematic assessments of student progress provided to the student's parents. What that means is we're documenting the interventions that we're putting in place in Tier 1, in Tier 2, and in Tier 3. It's systematic and there's regular feedback. And what we do, the team will come back together and we'll look at the data and talk, you know what, Johnny did this, he didn't do well here. And we usually have graphs, we'll graph it, but he's doing well here. This works for him, so we're going to continue to do that. Then we make those changes. What else do we need to put in place? So it's a systematic approach. And then if the child has not made adequate progress and in an appropriate amount of time, and what is the appropriate amount? The law does not define that, but as a team, we come together, we look at that. So maybe 2 months or 3 months have gone by, and we put these interventions in place, we've met on a regular basis, we provided the family with feedback, and we realize he's still struggling, he's not making it, she's still struggling, things are not improving, then that's when we make a referral for an evaluation to determine if the child will meet the needs of a special education student, and then they may be provided related services to be considered.
So now we want to talk about, what do parents need to know? So parents, students, and teachers, all three are the educational team that must work together for our students to be successful. So of course, the teacher, the administrator, parent, and then you have parents' rights and procedural safeguards. So this is what parents need to know, what they can do to make sure their child is successful. And when we say parents, of course, we know it's not always mom and dad. It can be aunt, uncles, grandparents, whoever is responsible for the child and is active in that child's life. Next slide, please. So your parent rights are to participate, receive prior written notice, and you can also consent or refuse consent. And you need to be informed of the policies regarding children who attend private schools as well. So it's not just FCPS, it's also for private schools as well. There is, parents have the right to a non-discriminatory assessment, an independent educational assessment, access to educational records, and to stay in the current program if there's a disagreement about placement. So that could be, there's a disagreement about where the child is placed as far as special education, and if they are receiving services in the classroom or outside of the classroom. And then there's some discrepancy there. They need to stay in this current program while the disagreement is ongoing and until we find a solution to that problem. You can also be given a hearing regarding your disagreements about an individual education plan, which is the IEP, and you have a due process hearing. You have the right to participate in a resolution session, to receive mediation, to file a complaint against your school system, and to be informed of school discipline and alternative placement. So the referral evaluation process goes through an ARC, which is an admissions and release committee. This ARC meeting will be held, and then parent permission must be obtained, and the school has 60 days to complete the evaluation from this date. And evaluation components may consider cognition, academic, social, emotional, communication, motor functioning, etc. So there are lots of different things to evaluate at this time. Eligibility, there are plenty of different categories. I won't go through them all, but these are just some that we know for sure that a child is deemed eligible to receive special education services, as we've talked about through IDEA Act that's hopefully going to be updated because it's 40 years old. But these are some of the areas that any child can receive special education services due to any of these impairments. So the IEP, Individual Education Plan or Program, is a written plan of action for a student with a disability who is eligible to receive special education and related services. So the IEP presents levels of performance. You have annual goals and objectives yearly that need to be met. So you have the ARC meeting that we talked about, where parents come together with the student. If they are over 14 years of age, they may be invited. If under, it is usually the parents and the teachers, administrators. You have school counselors, school psychologists. So there are different people who are working together on this team, the ARC team, to put together a plan for the child. So then we have different people who to contact within the special education department at the district. We have our executive director, Adam Lechty. We have associate directors. We have 2 for elementary, 1 for middle, and 1 for high. And then the evaluations and pre-K. And then we have the family or parent liaison, which is myself, Lashina Deadweiler Hudson. So I think now we are ready to take any questions. Yes, right on time.
Thank you so much. I do think we have a few questions in the chat. Since we were just talking about IEP and 504s, can someone explain the difference between the 2 of them?
Yes, and Margaret chime in also. So the difference with the 504 plan, it is a mandate from federal, but it's an unfunded mandate in that students who have non-categorical disabilities, and if you, Margaret, can you go back to the slide where we show the disability categories? So there are 14 disability categories that students can be found eligible under IDEA. But if a student has a disability and they do not they might require accommodations, but they don't require specialized instructional approaches, then they will qualify under 504. For example, a student may have ADD, so he or she may not be able to focus very well in school. A student may have asthma. A student may have, let's see, other qualifications, but there are different areas. They may have anxiety, for example, and because of these things, it's impacting a major life activity. So it might impact them in school, because we're always looking at the school setting. So as a result of that student having one of those type of disabilities, they need accommodation. So the accommodations is that the team gets together, look at the data, and they may say, okay, this student, because they have anxiety, we're going to shorten the amount of times they need to take this test. So they'll have less test items to take, or it may be they sit closer to the teacher. They may need a timeout. Those are different accommodations we can give a student like that. And then, but now when a student with who qualifies for an IEP under IDEA, they may have ADHD, but they may have something else. We're looking now at the fact that it's adversely impacting how they're responding in the classroom. So that the disability is impacting the way they respond. So when we talked about tier 2 and tier 3, when they get to tier 3, they're still not making adequate progress, whether it's behaviorally. And so they need a teacher with special education to serve them. So not only do they need the accommodations, but they may need additional services. So they may need a learning strategies class. They might need a co-taught class, because they need to be taught by a teacher with special education, and their instruction is individualized to what they need. And then they might need an additional to that, that might need speech and language services. That's by a specially qualified teacher for speech and language. They might need hearing interpretation services. So that's an example. So one needs accommodations, the other needs not just accommodations, but they need specialized instructional approaches. And that's what makes the difference. Anybody else? Margaret or Ben, did I get that right?
You did. So we do have another question that kind of relates. It's, can a child have an IEP and a 504? And so, yes, they can. Here in Fayette County, typically we do not. If a student, for example, has an IEP for, let's say, speech language impairment, but then they also have a medical diagnosis of, for example, sickle cell disease, we would combine those into one. So we would put the impairment information on the IEP, and then any accommodations that the student would need would also go on the IEP. That is our practice here in Fayette County. If you're in another county, there might be a different practice, but that is what we have done.
Sorry, so can I, that was my question. Sorry if I can verbally ask. So what happened though was, because it was a speech only IEP and the accommodations were written on there, because it was speech only, it never made it to the classroom teacher. So do I need to ask for a 504?
Typically, no. So the classroom teacher should have access. You are welcome to email me. And
Okay.
I am now keeping a list of our students that have 504s that are on IEPs, so that I make sure that those are distributed every year.
Okay, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. So I'm kind of going back up through our questions, guys. One of the questions was, do SCAPA students have to re-audition for the 9th through 12th if they were accepted in the 4th grade? And no, they do not. So once they are in that SCAPA program, they can continue within the program. I was also asked about the ethnicity analytics breakdown for students with 504 plans. I did not pull that together for this presentation, but I can, and I can send that out if that is information that you would like to see. We had a question about, when does the window open for testing in kindergarten early? Is there a link you can share? And I think further down, Miss V shared that information. She said early entry application opens January 6th with all other magnet programs. Testing typically takes place late January, February. The first step is to complete that application. I'm going back to be sure I don't miss any. So I think this is, what is the number you call for a school who is ignoring ongoing bullying for an autistic child? So typically, Sandy, you jump in here too. I would start with administration at the building. If you have done that and you are not receiving a response, if your child has a 504 plan, then I would reach out to the 504 chairperson at the school. Or if they have an IEP, I would reach out, if you're in Fayette County, to the achievement and compliance coach at the school. If that has still not settled the situation, then you can begin to reach out to us at the district level here in Fayette County, and we can help support and possibly mediate for that information. Sandy, do you want to add anything to that?
That is correct. That's the proper process.
Okay. We talked about the difference between 504 and IEP. Okay, this is for you, Sandy. Can you explain more on the difference between LBD, MSD tracks regarding diplomas, track, and then certificate of completion?
Okay, so typically when a student is, when we're looking at LBD students, they're usually on a regular standard diploma track. And so they're going to follow either the 22 or the 26 credits within their school, the English, the math, the social studies, the sciences, and things like that. What will happen though is they may get resources to support them. So if they're struggling in math, they have a disability, like let's say they're an SLD student, and which is specific learning disabilities, and they're struggling in that area, they'll have goals to work on those things. Now, when we look into our students with, when we talk about MSD, we're looking at students who have a moderate to severe disability. There will be an alternate assessment track. Typically, there is a process that we have to look at. So once they have been identified as a student on the MSD track, once they get into the schools, they are working towards really more functional skill set. So they'll still work on reading and math for those that can do that, but some of them are nonverbal, so they'll put some things in place such as a picture schedule, things like that. And then typically as they progress throughout their school years, then we start looking at, we want to transition them into the community. So what would that look like? So teaching them some functional skills, teaching them how to navigate the community, whether it's through employment skills, through life skills. We have a life skill center at Tates Creek High School. So teaching them how to navigate the home setting, because eventually we want them to become independent, whether to get a job or some of them will end up with assisted living, but how do they know how to take care of themselves as far as toiletry, going to the grocery store, picking up things, working in that community? And was there another part to that question?
No, I think that was it.
Okay.
So the next, and V's kind of answered it in the chat, but are there any services programs for students who are gifted and also have a disability, sometimes referred to as twice exceptional? As a parent, I can answer that. There are. So I have a student or a son who is twice exceptional, and he attended MSTC at Paul Lawrence Dunbar. So many of our programs, schools for gifted students also have students with 504 plans and or with an IEP who need specially designed instruction or certain accommodations. So that is something, and I think Ms. V put additional information to reach out to Julie Gann. She is also the gifted coordinator. So my email is, I can add it to the slides, especially if everyone is going to be able to keep the slides, but it's margaret.murphy, and I will type it in the chat. Then we have, can special education students apply to SCAPA, or is it gifted only? Ms. V, I'll let you answer that question.
So anybody can apply to any of our programs. So that's number one. And there are certain processes that you have to go through, in that audition and application process. But anyone that wants to apply to any of our district-wide programs can absolutely do so.
Okay. There is a question that says, is there a law stating when a 504 plan must be done after the request has been made? They are not in Fayette County. They're in a different school system. Last year, they requested a 504 in February, and it never got done after many reminders. It doesn't really matter now since the independent school had it done before school started, but just curious. So basically what attorneys are telling us is no, there are not specific guidelines for Section 504. However, we follow typical IDEA guidelines to be sure that we are in compliance. So once a referral is made, at least in our procedures, which are available on Fayette County Public School website, and they were recommended by an attorney in Kentucky, and many counties use these same policies and procedures. So you might check for the county that you're in what their procedures are, but we are to respond within 10 days of any referral. Scrolling down, guys, to see if there's more. If a child has an IEP, how often should parents expect to have ARC meetings to review, discuss how the accommodations are helping the student in the classroom? And Sandy can answer that, but it's at least once a year.
Yes, so typically we have what we call annual reviews, and those happen once a year. 3-year, then in between that, every 3 years is a 3-year reevaluation. Now, at the onset of an annual review, once the IEP is written, each report card, the child, whenever this report card is given, the progress towards those goals should be given. And at that point, if a parent is noticing that their child is not responding well or not doing well, you can request an ARC meeting to discuss that. So even though we have an annual review each year, which is once a year a meeting, you can have more than one meeting in a year. So once you get those the data and you think that your child is not responding, whether it's on their report card or on the report of the goals, then you can request a meeting.
That is all the questions in the chat. Are there any more questions? We are, I think, 2 minutes shy of our time.
If anyone has a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and just ask the question also. You don't have to type it in the chat at this point. Did we answer everyone's question as it relates to how do you advocate for your child in education? Did we miss anything?
Can we, sorry, I have a question.
Go for it, Megan.
Is there any suggestions of accommodations to ask for when going into a 504? Like just what the general idea of what kind of accommodations could be made for a student so that have an idea. I'm actually have a meeting on this tomorrow at the school.
It really does depend on the disability area. And then like we just did a whole training this morning with our elementary guidance counselors here in Fayette County on, you know, what that major life impact is, what area, and then when we're seeing the student struggle and developing those accommodations to specifically address that. So, I mean, if you would like to have a conversation about that this afternoon, I'd be more than willing to talk to you. I can put my office phone number or my work cell number in the chat. And just talk through some possible accommodations, but it's hard to know without knowing the specifics of your student. So I'll add my number to the chat just in case. And your school chairperson should be able to guide you through that process as well.